Hi, everybody, and good evening. Well, evening-ish here from the Temple of Silence, and we're continuing with number 47 of a Treatise on White Magic webinar commentaries for it's for the rules of magic for the astral plane. The last program was a long one, but you can, if you're listening to it, you can just turn it on and off at will. And I would recommend too that if you ever use these for classes, you just stop the program and discuss what you want to discuss. There's no reason why you have to listen to it all the way through. DK was telling us about the necessity of moving through the stage of selfishness on the way to selflessness. It is a primitive state, but a necessary state, and we move in sequence accordingly, all the way from, just I am, I wish, I desire, I will, reinforcing that which the little self feels through various stages of self-centeredness and control into maybe real usefulness if the soul in incarnation is awakening within, which is, of course, always the desirable end. It's possible to have a very powerful personality without the sense of the inward awakening soul, in which case, in a way, you would still be in the hall of ignorance somewhat, or at least facing the lower chakras as if they were the true sources of life, which in a way they are, but ignoring the higher of the pairs of opposites. But eventually, sometime in the fifth petal, I want to say after the fall, after the crash, after the realization that the lower ego is but a tiny thing, and some humility and true aspiration is gathered, then it becomes possible to step upon the path in that petal, especially toward the end of its unfoldment. As far as how long these petals do take to unfold, well, the earlier, the longer. I guess that is a principle. So petal number one, a long, long time, and petal number two, also, even millions of years. Excuse me. So we have gone to the point that all of this sequence should be paralleled by the inner growth of soul awareness, though the mode of expression of that inner growth is largely dependent upon the ray upon which the spiritual entity is found, and we have all these ray variations entering and eventually an awakening to a higher of the pairs of opposites. And this is occurring within the hall of learning, or at least it should be. It should not be covered, or let's just say that development, which has come a long way, should not be inverted, as it sometimes is, and the awakening powers of the soul prostituted again to the reinforcement of the strengthening personality. There are some for whom that does happen. Okay, so we're entering the period in many ways during the Aquarian age of the coming of the dominant emergence of the dominant personalities along with the groups. And I think DK told us that sometimes at the heads of groups we will find dominant personalities, but presumably those also in the best groups who have the soul energy, the soul consciousness proportionately unfolded. So now I think we're ready to go on to the next section. One point should here be noted, and upon this point, aspirants should exercise care. The usual connotation of the word spiritual growth is that of a religious growth in understanding. At some point, DK tells us this is really a victory for the Black Lodge to interpret spiritual growth solely in terms of religious growth, and it's going to be one of the reasons why it's difficult for some, or will be difficult for some, to make the transition into the age of Aquarius, where religion may take on a very different, even scientific type of expression. Yeah, okay. I just don't want to cover anything up here. There we go. Okay, that's looking a little better. Right. All right, there we go. A man is deemed spiritual if he is interested in the world scriptures, if he is a church member, and if he lives a saintly life. But we can see how so many forms of help for humanity need to come along different lines, can't we? According to the ashram with which a man may be associated by ray affinity. But this is no true definition, for it is not sufficiently comprehensive. Indeed. I mean, just imagine if there was a world in which never was the possibility of a spiritual politics or spiritual humanitarian attitude, a social spirituality, or material, financial spirituality, or an artistic spirituality. You know, imagine if it all was confined to the sixth ray. There could be no scientific spirituality, and magic would forever be excluded from the definition of spirituality. Only the sixth ray would capture that title and leave out so many areas along which humanity should be helped. Anyway, it has grown out of the impress set upon human thought and terminologies by the Piscean age, and through the influence of the sixth ray and the work of the Christian church, all most necessary and all inherent in the great plan, but which, divorced from their eternal context, lead to overemphasis of certain divine expressions and the overlooking of other as vital manifestations of the divine consciousness. Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? And remember that the sixth ray is one of those adhesive rays, and Pisces may have the ability to look backwards pretty well in terms of summarization, but maybe trouble looking towards truer possibilities in the future. So anyway, the divine consciousness, it's far wider, vital manifestations of the divine consciousness. Now something's wrong here. Something's missing. I've got to find what that is. Vital manifestations of the divine. Yeah, okay, of the divine consciousness. The true significance. Okay, it's far wider. So something's been eliminated. The true significance of the word spiritual growth, of the true significance of the words spiritual growth. Right, I don't know how that got left out, but it did, and I hope it wasn't my fault here. Is far wider and more inclusive than their manifestation through the medium of religious and mystical literature and organizations for the imparting of metaphysical truth. It's just one aspect within a great and wide energy context. Power, purpose, will are divine qualities and expressions and show themselves with equal clarity through a Mussolini or through a Pope. And here I think, we're assuming, of course, the first is a negative manifestation and the second a positive. But just to be a Pope, of course, does not mean that one is having a positive effect. The notorious Borgias became popes and carried their negative attitudes and habit patterns into the papacy. But in general, there's a contrast between a fascist authoritarian leader and one who is the head of the church, some of whom are supposed to have contact with the Master Jesus. Okay, in both cases, the mechanism of expression modifies and steps down the qualities and serves as a handicap. A potent personality may function in any field of human expression, and his work will warrant the word spiritual just insofar as it is based on high idealism, the greatest good of the largest number, and a self-sacrificing endeavor. Okay, so that is what spirituality is meaning to the Tibetan, one of the definitions of it. High idealism, which of course can begin to touch the archetype. The archetype that must be manifested is located in a way on a plane of idealism, the monadic plane, the sixth ray, or in the sixth position from the lowest plane. The greatest good of the largest number, so that the time-space schedule of the planetary logos can be upheld, and self-sacrificing endeavor so that the lesser is offered on behalf of the increase of the greater. And personality, well, is it we need an external form. Now, even the causal body is an external form compared to the true inner spiritual man. And in a way, the causal body is a supra-personality or a trans-personality. So it's not just the world of personality, but also the acquisitions of the causal body through many temporary personalities, and that causal body may be considered in a way as a personality compared to the true inner man. So these three, idealism, group service, and sacrifice, are the characteristics of those personalities who are becoming increasingly sensitive to the soul impact, the qualities of that soul being knowledge, love, and sacrifice, sacrificial will. When we say the word sacrifice, knowledge pedals, love pedals, and the will pedals, but it's the sacrificial will pedals. I guess divine will, spiritual will, is inherently sacrificial. So idealism, group service, and sacrifice. These define the domain of spirituality. Excuse me. Let's ponder on that for just a moment, And I guess it's always harder, in a way, to open the sacrifice petals or dimensions of life than any other. Maybe it depends upon the ray of the monad, but inherently, generically, the ability to sacrifice is the last to be really developed. But I've discussed this before. Those on the second ray monad can open the love petals just about as rapidly as they open the knowledge petals. Maybe they're a little bit held back in terms of the knowledge petals, and the first ray types, they open sacrifice more easily than the others, but they're held back in the realm of love, and we might say that the clever, intelligent third ray types are held back in the realm of sacrifice because they can so often find a way to make uh, uh, what looks like a sacrifice an unreal sacrifice. They are intelligent in that way and in many other ways. So idealism, group service, and sacrifice are characteristics of those personalities who are becoming increasingly sensitive to soul aspect. The qualities of that soul being, as I said, knowledge, love, and sacrifice. So knowledge is linked with idealism, and the third ray is linked with the sixth ray, as he tells us, special relationship. And love is, of course, linked with group service, because we have to begin to reach out to others as if they mattered as much as we matter to ourselves. And that's the Christ impulse, and of course sacrifice is equivalent to sacrifice. And that is why the emphasis in all schools of true esotericism is laid on motive, and that's why the masters look at motive when we try to perform something in the world. It may appear good and not be fundamentally good. It may appear wanting and yet be based on solid and good and rich, selfless motives. We can't always judge the book by its cover. We can't always tell what lies behind a particular gesture that appears on the world stage. People who are strongly individual and are developing a group consciousness in some life, inevitably in some life, find their way into esoteric schools. But what will the motive be? What is the motive? He already told those who came to him. What was the motive? He immediately warned those in his group that it was a kind of a spiritual ambition or selfishness that brought them to his group. So it tells us the disc is full, save as, and I'm going to call this, let's just see if it works. Hopefully it works. I always have that sinking feeling in my heart when it looks like I have not succeeded in saving these changes, which will have their own usefulness to some people. So this is why the emphasis in all schools of true esotericism. There are some schools that emphasize a rather selfish esotericism. I'm thinking about some of these schools that exalt the personalities that enter them and make them seem great above all others. I'm thinking, about the attitude of such a practitioner as Aleister Crowley. He obviously knew a lot, but there was a selfishness in his approach. There's a story of a person on a mountain trip. He was a good mountaineer, suffering badly in some way that needed assistance, and he just couldn't bother to offer the assistance, even though he could have. So it's very hard to break that sort of first-ray selfishness that makes a man eventually, psychopathologically untouchable, says DK. So they inevitably, in some life, if they're individual and developing group consciousness, find their way into esoteric schools and have to be guided in such a manner that the soul nature enfolds, overpowers, and uses the personality nature as under the regime of esoteric training, the soul nature could be ignored. And this is a recipe for choosing the left-hand path. The outstanding characteristics of those personalities, I guess the emphasis is still on the strongly developing and efficient and powerful personality nature, on those personalities who are not yet soul-centered or controlled, are dominance, ambition, pride, and lack of love of the whole. Well, these are lower Leo characteristics, lower first-rate characteristics, though they frequently possess love for those who are necessary to them or to their comfort. I think we can look out in the world and we can find these very people who are quite unaware of the need for higher motives in their life. They think they're doing quite a good job at what they do, but they are inherently maybe small and petty creatures, as DK talked about just a little earlier. Small units of life filled with braggadocio and bombast. So, you have therefore in the sequential development of humanity the following stages. DK repeats things in different ways. So watch the teaching power of the various, of DK's various modes of repetition. So we have first the animal consciousness, animal man, and for a long time, even individualized man was pretty much the selfish, animalistic man. Number two, the emotionally polarized individual, selfish and governed by desire, and all that got really out of hand in Atlantis, so that we're told desires became so inflated they lost all connection to true need and to what was important for spiritual growth. They just became vastly magnified, and heights of luxury were achieved just to satisfy these desires. Unnecessary, of course, these heights of luxuries, so that we could hardly even dream of the extremes to which these yearnings went. The two above stages, plus a growing intellectual grasp of environing conditions, you become smart in your selfishness. Okay, one becomes smart in his selfishness. And the mind is the inverted 5-pointed star and points downward. It's always bad when we prostitute or invert a higher power for the satisfaction of lower objectives. I'm going to make this a 5-pointed star, and this is a 5-pointed. Sorry. Oh, goodness. I think we already have a 6-pointed star. I think so. Let's see. What's the fastest way? Subplanes. No. SXPS. No, we don't have that, so let's do that. That's a good one. 6-pointed star. 6-pointed star, the symbol, among other things, of the monad. Then comes the stage of responsibility to family or friends. It's really, we might say, really the beginning of a small measure of soul impact. I'm watching the news these days. I'm seeing a man who has obviously committed crimes, but his loyalty seems to be to his family first. And, the wolf may go hunting, but has an important, more loving attitude, more responsible and caring attitude towards the children, the brood. Then, okay, responsibility, but one is not satisfied with that. Then comes the stage of ambition. That's the orange ball. You're seizing the orange ball. You may have been out there playing on the green field, but at a certain point you seize it, and you use sort of that Leo energy, that 1-5 energy, to ascend over others, the stage of ambition and of longing for influence and power in some field of human expression, and this leads to fresh endeavors. So ambition has a DVTL, developmental purpose. Under the spur of ambition of trying to exceed one's past and exceed others, one develops necessary capacities. I guess we've all been through it, even though we have forgotten the exact circumstances. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson told us there comes a time when we realize that all envy, all jealousy, is foolish, that we have to develop what we are from within ourselves rather than compete. So it's a competitive stage, adversarial stage. Then comes the coordinating of the personality equipment under the above stimulus, because what do we say that, trying to get ahead demands a coordinated, powerful personality. Okay. That's not good. Maybe I can just set the number value at 6 and hope for the best. Then the stage of influence, I guess he's summarizing what he went over in a little more loose form. This is quite tight, and it gives us the sense of the sequence through which we all must pass, or in the case of the sincere student of esotericism, spiritual esotericism has passed. The stage of influence, selfishly used and frequently destructive because the higher issues are not registered as yet. In other words, let's put it like this. Lower egotism shuts out the higher ego. And soul and triad are not known. Then, of course, usually within this comes a lot of disappointment because, we realize that we do drive people away from us, and we drive the support we need away from us, and we end up standing alone. Just read the first technique of integration in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, and you'll see the bad end to which this kind of selfishness comes. The first ray technique. He extends his arms into a cross and basically says, I need others now. I have to care about them. I have to walk the path with others. That's the same in a way as walking the path with a staff which has that shepherd's crook to hold. It's a symbol of the care that we have for others who may be walking the path with us or for those who may be following us. And then, a more Aquarian phase, a phase of stage of steadily growing group awareness. This is viewed first as a field of opportunity. What can we say? The group, the group will help me get more of what I want. And some of this is corporate culture. DK warned about the rising of selfish groups that would be much harder to deal with than the selfish individual. And then later, a sphere of service. But it's usually through some sort of bitter experience that one becomes selfless. And finally, a place where sacrifice for the good of all becomes gloriously possible. And he is speaking as one who has discovered the glory of selflessness, as has the Christ and as have all the masters, really, and the higher initiates in general. So we see the developmental sequence all the way from the animalistic instinctual phase to becoming the human being who is a human being for other human beings, the so-called man for others. I had mentioned that up here in northern Norway, Tromsø, maybe the highest university town north, the most extreme latitude north. There is a convent there that Tui and I go to hear the Vespers and other beautiful outpourings of real spirituality. I think it's called Totus Tuus. I never did study Latin, but it means all for you, entirely for you, or we're giving ourselves for you. So the true Christian and the true spiritualized human being is the one who lives for others, recognizing those others as himself or herself. So it becomes increasingly beautiful as we progress because, let's just say, in unity and oneness lies true beauty. The other is discord that comes from egotism. I mean, everything is out of tune when a bunch of lower egos get together and start clashing. You have dissonance. Speaking of it in musical terms, there has to be a chord in music between the various elements, and there may be passing dissonances for the sake of interest and for the release of tension that comes with the resolution of dissonance into harmony. But there's, it's always terribly unsatisfying if a piece ends with a great dissonant chord. It usually ends with a totally euphonious, harmonically related series of notes or clustering of notes, a great amen, so to speak, as in the lost chord. Anyway, DK gives us a musical analogy about how the morning stars do sing together, and in the marriage song of the Grand Heavenly Man, somewhere in the old commentary, stanzas found in a treatise on cosmic fire. Okay, this latter stage puts a man upon the path of discipleship, and even an initiate acts in this way, which includes, needless to say, that of the earlier phase, probation or testing. Unless we're tested, we just can't trust ourselves. So unless we are tested, we cannot trust rust. We can do that. Trust ourselves, nor can others trust us. So we must prove ourselves via Scorpio. It brings the whole battle down onto the physical plane, we're told, and there you make good or you do not, until finally you do make good, via your accumulated powers, of course, but via the growing humility. There's something going on there in Scorpio, which is very similar at the end to what's going on with Gemini. You're helping Atlas uphold the world. Well, okay, but you're also uplifting your lower nature, where it will die in the heights of unitive Buddhic realization. It just you just see things differently, and you can't keep living the selfish life when you have the strength to lift up the lower nature, for impression by the higher energies. I think there's a lot in Capricorn as well about this. A journey from hell to heaven, or from earth to hell and then to heaven. All of this lies ahead of us. And maybe even now we've begun to participate in some of it, but not compared to the type of participation which will be demanded of us when we become a true member of hierarchy, or a true initiate and very close to the masters, and cooperating as fully as possible in their enterprises. I just guess, that every sincere student, meditator, server is on his way, on her way. So there's the sequence. Okay, so we yeah, here we go. So we have been given a tight sequence of spiritual progression, which takes millions of years. Maybe it's a good thing we forget for the time being what we've been through, but oh, what a movie it will make. When I was a kid, I used to have dreams of seeing a movie of my life, and only later did I realize that it was more like a review of past experiences, a lot of which were very troubling, and some maybe not so troubling. I always tried to figure out what perfect fairness was, how to love people equally, how to do that. It was just one of those Libran things that was always occurring to my mind, I think unprompted. Well, we each have our ways of reviewing the past. The problem consists in ascertaining upon which step of the ladder and in which phase one finds oneself at any particular time. This is where the wish becomes the father to the thought. This is where we tend to exaggerate, and where the lower personality or lower ego takes over and misrepresents the true scene. If you were to look in an unbiased manner, what would you find? You'd see the good, the bad, you'd see it all proportionately. and you would not try to influence the outcome. There would be a reduction of bias, a tendency already to lean in one direction or another. Behind each human being stretches a long series of lives, and some are now headed towards the stage of dominant selfish personality expression and are making themselves individuals in full self-conscious awareness. Matter of fact, this period is coming, and as I said, DK told us it would present its own problems, because the question is, when we relate to the five-pointed star, will it be turned upward toward the soul, or will it be turned downward towards self-aggrandizement and bending the already developed powers towards the emphasis upon the aggrandizement of the lower self? A long series of lives, millions of years. Even if you were imported from the moon chain somewhere in the third subrace of the fourth root race, it's still been millions of years on this planet. Well, that's a time estimate that just seems so outrageous to contemporary thinkers. They just don't see how it could be. But when we study rational philosophical occultism, we begin to see how it could be. So this is for them as much a step forward as is discipleship for all of you. Assuming you've been there, we assume that, and you may have had a period in your life where you even recapitulated those stages. So we cannot judge. Every step forward is of value, and much depends on when you started out on your monadic journey. It wasn't, all monadic types and all monads within the circle of monads did not necessarily start at the same time, and nor did they react to their opportunities in the same way, and that determines their progression to a degree. Others are already personalities and are beginning to experiment with the energy flowing through them and to gather around themselves those people who vibrate to their note and for whom they definitely have a message. So these are, what can we call them, integrated human beings growing in power. Hence the myriads of small groups all over the world working in every known field of human expression. I once saw a list of some of the positively inclined groups that just went on and on and on and on. So many people working at things, positive things in this case, many more than one could imagine. Others have passed beyond that stage and are becoming decentralized from the personality expression in the three worlds of human life and are motivated by an energy which is the higher aspect of the personality energy. Presumably, they are becoming soul-infused personalities, and they have recognized the higher of the pairs of opposites, the soul. No longer do they work, plan, and struggle to express their personalities and to make their individual impact upon the world. You see so many people who want to be a star, in a way, interesting, want to be famous, fighting for their fame, fighting against others to be more popular, and so forth. So they're not fighting anymore, these people, for their individual impact upon the world or to gather magnetically around themselves a group of people who look up to them and thus feed the springs of their pride and ambition and who make them both influential and important. Anything like that really for the spiritual type has to come from within and not from the adulation of the crowd or even the small group who seems devoted. They are beginning to see things in a newer and truer perspective, in the light of the whole. In the light of the whole, the light of the little self fades out, just as The light that is inherent in every atom of the body is gathered together and obliterated in the light of the soul when that blazes forth in all its glory. So here we are speaking of the transfiguration and beyond. Oops. And even of the supernova of the fourth initiation. Well, we're taking step by step and looking at the stages in which human beings find themselves. And of course, according to the law of economy, there are those who can help somebody at every stage, but those who are, let's say, in a position to help those who are becoming disciples are not going to be assigned to the helping of those who are not yet personalities. So everybody has a proper place, and there's no pride attached to that place, just a recognition of where one can be most useful. When this stage of selflessness, of service, of subordination to the one self, I serve the one, right, in Gemini, and of sacrifice to the group becomes the objective, man has reached the point where he can be received into that group of world mystics and knowers and group workers, which is the physical plane reflection of the planetary hierarchy. And presumably now we are about to talk about the new group of world servers, a group of mystics, knowers, world mystics, knowers, group workers, which reflects the spiritual hierarchy of the planet, and increasingly so as the boundaries between the ashrams have been somewhat loosened, and as there can be a freer flow of these servers between the ashrams that they represent. So this is a whole story here, a whole story of the journey from what follows here. What follows tells about the journey from selfishness to utter selflessness, and with distinct stages which must be recognized. RECO. Which must be recognized within oneself and in others. So if we can have the humility to really know the particular stage at which we stand, well then already a major obstacle has been overcome, and we're far less prone to the exaggerations and the minimizations of glamour and to the separative thinking of illusion. This is the transition from identification as a personality, and even before that, to identification as a soul that works through an instrument called a personality. We repeat these words, you know, they are fairly common words to people in our field, but we have really to assess whether we have achieved this. And we have to assess with humility, with correct observation and deduction. All right, so, you know, we're getting there now. I will continue and make this program a larger program if I can. We're not quite to the 1 hour point, but we're getting there, just 10 minutes away. And we're going into the new group of world servers. Now, remember, this was written at the time when the new group of world servers was really emerging. I think that my guess is that some impulse was started around 1925 when quite a number of the ashrams, and especially those on the soft line rays, moved to change their focus to the Buddhic plane. And that, of course, meant far greater intercommunication between them, and loaning and borrowing, reinforcing and helping one's own ashramic efforts if one is a master with units from other ashrams. Maybe some of the scientific ashrams, those on Ray 5, maybe to an extent on Ray 3, stayed upon the higher mental plane. That's the impression that I've gathered. But this was the time of the servers emerging, so that by 1932 there was another impulse, and every 7 years or so, a strong impulse. 3-year cycles, 7-year cycles, 9-year cycles, put them all together. Well, you have the number 63 that somehow comprises them all. The 3, the 7 times 9, the 9 times 7, they all come together in the number 63, and that number 2 has been offered as a number beyond which an ashram must not grow, but a new ashram has to take its place once the full complement of members is reached. Okay, we have spoken often of the integrating group of knowers. That's the thing, and in the Aquarian age, it's going to be an age of knowledge, of direct knowing, achieved through experiment and experience. The integrating group of knowers who are beginning to function upon the earth, gathered together in loose formation and held by an inner spiritual tie, and not by outer organization. This is so important because the organization forming tendency wants to make everything, all aggregations of people, into externally organized aggregations or groups. But this is different. This is a subjective affiliation based upon soul infusion and soul realization and some degree of knowledge of the higher of the pairs of opposites. The planetary hierarchy has always existed. Well, yes, certainly the directors of the planets have always existed, and that the formation of a Shambhala and a hierarchy some 18.5 million years ago was a new phase of it, calling for the intervention of certain lords of the flame from the Venus chain of the Earth scheme. All of that is well presented in the various charts, Let's see if I have this. And okay, let's see what we have here. Oh, yeah, there we go. 2, 3. These are 2 years charts. But there we have it, and all of these lines talk about the coming of the Lords of the Flame, inspired in a way from Venus to the Venus chain, but then connecting directly to the Earth chain. These lines show the story of that influence. Okay. The planetary hierarchy has always existed. Always, of course, is a big word, but, for a long time. And from time immemorial and right down the ages, these sons of men who have fitted themselves for work and who have measured up to the requirements have found their way into the ranks of those who stand behind the world evolution and guide the destinies of the little ones. And I guess all human beings are the little ones in this context. It is also a specialized term for initiates of the first and second degree, but compared, even initiates of the third degree are just, well, they're young men, rich young men, but they are not fully mature members of the hierarchy. There are those symbolic terms to describe our status. Anyway, it's hard to say at the formation of the globe and the various globes in the early days what form hierarchy took. We're usually given to understand the form it took when when the Lords of the Flame came, and when the solar angels at an earlier time, even 2.5 million years earlier, were shot forth from the bow to stimulate animal man, either through direct implantation or through the stimulating of the growing mental unit. So for a long time, we cannot imagine really that the planetary logos did not have his highly ranked helpers. But the story of hierarchy for us really begins in relation to our Earth chain and our globe around 18.5 million years ago, whatever may have been the constitution of those who assisted the planetary logos in the earlier phases of the process. So if we make ourselves fit, we can join those who guide the destiny of the planet and uplift the little ones. So through the teaching, as we've been presented, their grades and works are theoretically known, and the names of some have been given out to the masses. I guess, what does it say? At what cost and personal sacrifice? Those masses will never know. It has to do with all the thought and all the forces directed towards those who have revealed their names. It's like willingly stepping into a jungle of energies when one could be clear of those things if one did not engage through the revelation of one's name, one's post, one's responsibility, one's status. With the hierarchy of adepts, I do not propose to deal. The books upon the subject are easily available and should be read with the needed reservations as to symbolical interpretation and the limiting effects of words. Well, right. And so even, let's just say, this was begun with IHS, Initiation Human and Solar, the very first book for the public. There he describes the functions of certain of the masters, and it's a clear giving out of who they are and something about their history and something about their responsibilities and so forth. And of course, they're mentioned throughout the books and in the externalization of the hierarchy and later in the rays and initiations. I mean, they're mentioned, discussed really throughout the teaching. And we remember that this particular book is for the edification of the aspirant and disciple. And this involves very much the control from the mental plane of the astral body and the methods of soul infusion. An event is, however, transpiring upon earth which is in its way as momentous and as important as that crisis in Atlantean times when the physical, vital, and astral bodies were coordinated and formed a functioning unit. So, okay. Well, that was an earlier stage, and we note that the mind is not mentioned. The yoga of devotion, or Bhakti Yoga, was initiated for the training of aspirants at that time, and even now has undergone a revival. A physical plane replica, as far as such a replica was then possible, was organized of those who could work devotedly and who could learn through the use of ceremonial and pictures. So this is the origin. So this is the origin. I think we're at the 1 hour point, really, of the ceremonial work today, and Masons and other fraternal orders. Owe much to these earlier developments. So some kind of physical plane replica was created, organized, and many assembled who were devotees, but with the possibility of developing the mind, perhaps they could learn through ceremonial and pictures. Some mode of activity which would carry on the hierarchical work on earth and thus constitute a training school for those who later would be admitted into the ranks of the hierarchy. So the way into the hierarchy was not strictly mental, or did not really emphasize the mind, but pictorial representation and symbolism according to the rays then involved, the 6th ray, the 4th ray in Atlantean period. But, oh, goodness. The evidence is here, my friends, that I have read this book before. My mind did not wander over the coming sentences, but obviously it has made an impact. The remnants of this Atlantean group remain with us in the modern Masonic movements, and the work of the hierarchy was thus perpetuated in sign and symbol. And this is one way to learn, and it's with the new developments in Masonry, still greater potentials are held forth. This, at least, is one way to learn and to become intuitive in the modern world. Thus, or there has thus been preserved in the consciousness of the race a pictorial presentation of a momentous planetary condition which worked out in the human family in this threefold coordination, body, ether, astral vehicle. We have to integrate certain parts of the personality together before we can integrate the entirety of it. So we have the body, etheric body, and astral body. But it was primarily objective. Form and symbol, tool and furniture, temple and tone, office and externalities were the prominent factors, even as in some Masonic groups they are today. These are groups which do not explore esoteric Masonry, as, let's say, the ATOWM movement does today, taking it forward along the esoteric line. when I was a Mason in the Blue Lodge in Scottish Rite back in, of all places, Fargo, North Dakota, and that was 44 years ago. Shortly after I began to present esoteric ideas to maybe a few people who might be interested in learning them, but I found that the interest was limited, and the mind was focused on a lot of externalities and did not want to move into wider range of consideration. So it was primarily objective then, and even now among some of the Masonic presentations which have not gone deeper in esotericism, form and symbol, Masonic tools, the furniture. These are concretions. Temple and tone. Saw a sad thing, on 21st Street in New York. The great Masonic temple there. Basically, there just weren't enough people to support it, to participate in it, and just started renting out its rooms and its temples to people who didn't know a thing about what the origin was. And I've seen that even in my old temple, which was new at the time in the early 70s in Fargo. Just rooms were rented out to people who did not have anything to do with the Masonic enterprise, just to keep, as it were, paying the mortgage. But there is being a revival now. It was primarily objective, form and symbol, tool and furniture, temple and tone, office and externalities were prominent factors. They veiled the truth and therefore preserved the outer and visible form of an inner and spiritual reality. Those are important Masonic words. It's all through the proceeding, through allegory. And the rays involved, ray 1, ray 4, ray 7, which are rays closely associated with Vulcan, the rhythmic hammering of ray 7, the fashioner or artificer of gems and in metal, and then the powerful, willful impression of the first ray. Only those were, in those days, allowed to participate in these mysteries and work who felt within themselves the longing and desire for the mystical vision, and who loved deeply and were devoted to the spiritual ideal. Okay, so this is a Bhakti kind of requirement. I think we can recognize this as part of Bhakti Yoga. It's centered in the astral body, and it's the yoga of devotion, and looking forward to seeing the higher vision and one's relationship to it. And even love was there, and the spiritual ideal was there. So these were the type of requirements in those days. Necessitous requirements in those days. They were not required to possess active mentalities, and their intellectual powers were practically nil, except for their teachers. You kind of wonder how it was that the Atlanteans built these huge edifices and how they had vimanas, flying machines, and advanced technologies, and these things were given by the still elder brothers of the time and not by the masses who had not yet developed the intellectual powers. They liked and needed authority, as six-ray types do today. They learned, and this authoritarianism, is a threat in the modern world. There's a lot of people who are still involved with the Atlantean consciousness, and they They want their authoritarian. I mean, what is Nazism, fascism, but looking to Il Duce, or the Führer, the leader. A bunch of sixth-ray Atlanteanly inclined people gather together and look for the guidance of the one who knows, who's oftentimes kind of a megalomaniac. Such is the sad story of the modern time. It isn't over yet. And I'm just hoping that the numbers of people inclined in that way have been sufficiently reduced so it doesn't take over again. Even then there were people who were thinking and they just couldn't go along with fascism and Nazism. Maybe there was more intellectual justification for fascism as it represented illusion and maybe had more of a mental component in it. And there was much lying going on in presenting Nazism and the superiority of the Germanic race, which any true observer could see was fallacious. But then they got around that by saying, well, look, we've been polluted by the lesser races, by the Untermensch. We've been polluted, and as soon as we get rid of them and get rid of those who are polluted and get rid, we will return to our true Aryan Teutonic glory of 250,000 years ago. There was a lot of spurious occultism at the foundation of Nazism. And, the Black Lodge used it as a great opportunity. And there were quests going on of the Nazis coming to Tibet to meet the leaders. They weren't our leaders, they were the leaders of the negative forces. So it was an all-out attack upon the higher principles by which humanity is intended to live according to the divine plan. So they didn't have to have active mentalities, their intellectual powers nil, okay? They liked and needed authority, they learned through ceremonial. DK says, even now you can learn through ceremonial if you're on the first or seventh ray and don't have a great power of imagination. At least it's dramatized out there before you. They were devoted to the great ones whose names and forms stood behind the office holders in the esoteric lodges. Ah, okay. And that's an interesting statement, isn't it? Because even then, there were esoteric lodges, and maybe god kings whom the offices represented. Represented. Mind entered not in. This must be remembered, and going back to what he's been talking about for a long time, there were no personalities, what can we call them? He called them many things already. Self-guiding individuals who were integrated, mentally controlled, and had somehow possessing the power of their integration. Such people as that were not existing, but the leaders were developed at an earlier time. They had these qualities and more. Today in the world, another great moment of crisis has arrived. Sometimes I like to watch, war documentaries, I guess I could say. Being a good Aries, I'm never too far from the god of war. And I feel like as many of us do, we may have participated in it in some way, and it just gives every indication that the great battle is still on. And DK says that even the same leaders, personages who were at the head of the opposing parts of the Atlantean War have reappeared and were the dominant figures in the present World War I, World War II. This means the likes of Hitler, of Roosevelt, of Churchill, maybe some others in Japan, maybe Mussolini, who knows, have reappeared on a higher turn of the spiral. And we're leading humanity into another phase of the great battle between spiritual values and material values. Today in the world, another great movement or crisis has arrived. I refer not to the present world condition, but to the state of human consciousness. And that state, that state was instrumental in precipitating the Great War, which so far can be said to be 1914 to 1945. And who knows if the day will come when DK says, oh yeah, that war went underground from 1945 to the year 2000, and then reemerged in another way. There's no question in my mind that we're still fighting that war, but the hope is that it can be retained for the most part on subtle and psychological levels. Minds are fighting, desires and aspirations are fighting, ideals are fighting. We're still in the fight. Mind has arrived at a functioning power. Personalities are coordinated. The three aspects of man are being blended. Another formation or precipitation from the hierarchy of adepts has become possible. This is the EOH, the externalization and the reappearance. On the physical plane, without eventually, of course, now we have to have the precursors. We have to have the John the Baptist in group formation. On the physical plane, without any exoteric organization, ceremonials, or outer forms, there is integrating silently, steadily, and powerfully a group of men and women who will supersede eventually the previous hierarchical effort. So much of humanity's redemption will be in the hands of the new group of world servers, whatever they become. They will supersede all churches, all groups, and all organizations, and will eventually constitute that oligarchy, because they will be the ones truly wealthy in spirit. Usually an oligarchy is ruled by the wealthy, but they are wealthy in spirit. That oligarchy of elect souls, and of course there are distortions here in Calvinism about the elect, predetermined to be saved from the beginning, will govern and guide the world. So it's not just the philosopher king, it is a group of thinkers who will be the guide, and they will have proved themselves in ways which will be apparent to all those who can see. Mature men and women with sight. So often we just don't have that ability to see. We experience, but we don't understand. But the understanding is coming. All we have to do is get through what's called the tendency of the Black Lodge to fight to the last ditch as obstructors of these great and wondrous possibilities. They are being gathered out of every nation, but are gathered and chosen not by the watching hierarchy or by any master, but by the power of their response to the spiritual opportunity, tide, and note. So I'll just say this, they are found everywhere on earth, nations, churches, groups, etc., gathered out of every nation, maybe, even the slightest beginning nation, because so many nations have now emerged since this book was written, but are gathered and chosen not by the watching hierarchy, or by any master, but by the power of their response to spiritual opportunity, tide, and note. So, let's just say their response indicates their fitness or not to the new possibilities and to membership in the new group of world service. They are emerging out of every group and church and party. So the people who are, busy saying this is a terrible party, our party is the only one that's good, we'll have to recognize that there are really good people in every party. They're emerging out of every group and church and party and will therefore be truly representative. They have to have a wide point of view and make sure that no group in humanity is left unrepresented. It is important that no group in humanity remains unrepresented. This they do not from the pull of their own ambition and prideful schemes, but through the very selflessness of their service. So it's the selflessness of their service which signals their emergence into this group. The selflessness of their service is the signal of their emergence into this great group. They're finding their way to the top in each department of human knowledge because of their merit, right? Yeah, that's the important point. Merit and the coming meritocracies. I think, Plato's Republic was a meritocracy for sure. I'm less familiar with the utopia of Sir Thomas More and Sir Francis Bacon, but a real utopia has to have in leadership positions those who deserve to be there and have demonstrated merit. It's a term which indicates the value in Buddhism, which accrues to those who function properly on all levels of the personality. So they are finding their way to the top, even if they're not necessarily on the first fray, in every department of human knowledge, not because of the clamor they make about their own ideas, the claims, not because of the clamor they make about their own ideas, discoveries, and theories, but because they are so inclusive in their outlook, so wide in their interpretation of truth, that they see the hand of God in all happenings, his imprint upon all forms, and his notes sounding forth through every channel of communication between the subjective reality and the outer objective form. So, they are recognized not through any artificial claim making. Let's put here, they are not RCZD. Yep, they are not recognized through noisy claim making, the clamor, the self-assertion. They prove themselves. They do this by seeing divinity everywhere. They are of all races. They speak all languages. They So, the United Nations would be a good place for them to gather if it stays true to its founding intent. They embrace all religions, all sciences, and all philosophies. It's a very inclusive group, and we have to understand how inclusive it really is. It's so easy to forget and single out certain human beings as spiritual and others not. As a matter of fact, this new group of world servers gives the lie to the exclusive spirituality of churchianity. In other words, you have to be a member of some sect to be spiritual. No, because these spiritual people, these mystics, these intellectual mystics, these seers of divinity, they come from everywhere. They are of all races. They speak all languages. They embrace all religions, all sciences, and all philosophies. Their characteristics are synthesis, inclusiveness, intellectuality, and fine mental development. It's inspiring to think of who they are and to attempt to align with them if we are men and women of goodwill, and also attempt to be one of their number. So many of them have taken the second initiation. They own no creed save the creed of brotherhood based on the one life. So this is obviously and finally this is a monadic realization. Brotherhood is part of monadic awareness. Part of monadic awareness. Okay. Right. They recognize, well, they own to no creed. I remembered, when I was a choir director in various churches, and of course I was raised entirely different from this Christian method. We had to recite the Apostles' Creed, as if to solidify our belief. I never could go with it, it just seemed too narrow with a interpretation of what the Christ was, which was deviant from maybe a broader reality that I was coming to understand. So the creed of brotherhood, this is a much higher thing, and it doesn't get caught in concrete-minded distinctions. That's the key. Okay, I'm going to see if I've lost my... Oh, yes, I have. I've lost my chronometer. Well, then this will be again an irregular, of irregular duration. They recognize no authority save that of their own souls, and no master save the group they seek to serve. And, what can we say? Certainly not any individual who stands at the center of a group and makes claims for his or her exclusive authority over the group. They're beyond that. They're beyond the falling victim, as in the Gemini labor to the false teacher Bucyrus. Yeah, they don't anymore recognize that. Exclusive, well, that looks like a proper word. And humanity, whom they deeply love. And I think this deep love of humanity is one of the really distinguishing factors for the membership. And remember that at the second degree, the astral body is flooded with the energy of love, and the heart of the sun means something practical in the personality of the disciple, something really present. So, as we go along describing these members, we have to say, okay, how do I fit? Do I fit this? And, be honest about it. They recognize no authority save that of their own souls, no masters save the group they seek to serve, because there are some false masters out there, and humanity whom they deeply love. So their love of humanity and the serving of the group, these are their guiding stars. They have no barriers set up around themselves, but are governed by a wide tolerance and recognize those whom they can lift and to whom they can stand as the great ones stand, lifting, teaching, and helping. So, this is inclusive. This is not exclusive. They are not, maybe I can put it this way, always I failed there. The members of the new group of world servers are not victims of the great heresy of separateness. They recognize their peers and equals and know each other when they meet and stand shoulder to shoulder with their fellow workers in the work of salvaging humanity, petty, let's just say petty envies or jealousies do not exist among them. And, as hard as it is to imagine, no competition, but instead cooperation. It seems a simple thing, but even in the esoteric field, I'm sure we are all aware that competition now and then, well, even frequently, exists between various esoteric groups who should be supporting each other's labors. It does not matter if their terminologies differ, their interpretations of symbols and scriptures vary, or their words are few or many. So we're being told, overlook. No. There we go again. Overlook the non-essentials. And that's not so easy to do. We get hung up on little differences, little different points of interpretation. Okay. They see their group members in all fields: political, Ray 1, scientific, Ray 5, religious, Ray 2 and 6, economic, Ray 3 and 7. I might even say artistic, Ray 4 somewhere, and give to them the sign of recognition and the hand of a brother. I always remember that in the arcane school, maybe the very last part of a meditation report was to see whether we had identified any members of the new group of world servers. At the time, I didn't appreciate that necessity as much as I do now. They recognize likewise those who have passed ahead of them. Some move ahead, he follows after. Some move behind, he sets the pace. They recognize likewise, rules of the road. Those who have passed ahead of them upon the ladder of evolution and hail them teacher, and seek to learn from them that which they are so eager to impart. Well, we always have to recognize those from whom we are intended to learn and those to whom we must stand as teacher. And that's very important. Sometimes I've seen it happen that, whoops, serious errors. Okay, I'm just hoping this all works out well, and I'll be able to tell very shortly by the time. And so far it seems to be working out okay. Okay. When you're dealing with really big files, strange things happen. Okay, recognize those from whom we are intended to learn and those to whom we must stand as the teacher. I've seen the opposite happen. People who should be learning from some pretend they're the teacher, and people who should be, let's just say, leading others pretend they're the follower. But all those things get adjusted in time. The group is a product of the past, and upon that past I will touch. I mean, you hear people say when they're associated now, oh, look, we've been together before, and it's probably very much the case. I will also indicate the present situation and forecast somewhat the general lines along which their association and future work will run. Well, this seed group project is a 275-year project. It began around 1925 in a way, the seeds of it. And it is to be expected that those who participated in an active manner will be together on a few occasions to carry it forward, having learned from their experience. That such a group is forming is true and holds a good augury for the coming decades. Remembering that this was, written in the early 30s here, late 20s, in quiet and subtle ways, they are already making their presence felt, but theirs is as yet primarily a subjective influence. So we might say we are looking forward to the emergence, to the more tangible emergence of the new group of world servers. And maybe that has already begun to happen with so many helpful, spiritually inclined groups. Now some history, which I think will be of interest. Let us begin with the past. About the year 1400, and you kind of wonder whether it's the the era of the conclave, the centennial conclave of the hierarchy of 1425. But about the year 1400, the hierarchy of masters were faced with a difficult situation, and who knows what they can see. I'm sure every time they get together, from their high perspective, the difficulties are understood and the methods of working through them are proposed, and the let's just say the contribution of the 6th-degree initiates will be factored in as well, taking the great decision, but helping humanity along the way before dispersing upon the path on the way of high revolution, which they have chosen. And now they're being retained altogether. I guess the situation is so serious that Sanat Kumara said, okay, put in your choice and now stay here to help. As far as the work of the second ray was concerned, which had to do with the impartation of spiritual truth, there had come to be what I might call complete exteriorization of the truth. Was this scholasticism at a certain stage of crystallization? Was it so? Because, the 5th ray was needed at a certain point to really prove what people were talking about, rather than just say this is a good theory and repeat it often enough and it becomes the truth. So let's see what he says about the rays involved here. Now that's 620 years ago, roughly, or 600 years ago. We have our important centennial conclave coming up, and it's a great climaxing crisis point of opportunity towards which many of us are now working. The activity of the first ray had also brought about an intense differentiation and crystallization among the nations and governments of the world. You know, what can we call it? The warring city-states. And, always conflict. The real second ray, in a way, the second ray being the soul ray of the planet is always with us, but I think it's the year 1525, 1575. The place to find it is here, and we'll take that view and go to a little bigger, and we'll go to Esoteric Psychology 1, and we'll put the view in. View. Why doesn't it give me what I want? Expand one level? No, I don't want to expand any levels. Well, anyway, I think the page 26 is the page. So it's 1575. Ray 2 has been in manifestation since. Ray 3, which had a lot to do with the Italian Renaissance and a school for the Mahachohan, an advanced school, will be found in Italy. So that tells us something about the third ray in relation to that educational effort in that part of the world, even though its rays presently are 6 and 4. So the third ray was coming in, and the mind perhaps was being liberated, but not until 1575, really, did the 500-year Ray 2 cycle enter. Okay, so the first ray is a ray of division in many ways and a ray of synthesis. It rules the sword. The sword splits one thing from another, but it also can marshal all things together for synthesis. These two conditions of concrete orthodoxy and political differences persisted for many generations and are still manifesting. They would have led to very serious situation and maybe the thwarting of the potentials of the human race. Today we have a similar condition both in the world of religion and that of politics, both of which must be cleaning house in order for the reappearance of the Christ to occur, or let's just say that will influence the timing of the reappearance of the Christ. So today, in religion and politics, which are two allied areas and very dangerous together, if guided by narrowness and demagoguery, we have a similar situation. This is true whether one is considering India or America, China or Germany, or whether one is studying the history of Buddhism with its many sects, Protestantism with its myriads of warring groups, also called sects, or the many schools of philosophy in the Orient or the Occident. It's just a question of narrowness of perception causes many divisions, and the way one group holds itself distinct from another is almost laughable. You know, when you're baptizing someone, does it have to be total immersion, or can it be more symbolic with the holy water? And on the basis there, There will be a huge division. Is God a Trinity? Is God a unity? Let us have a great division on the basis of that, forgetting that God is both. So the many sects come from concrete mindedness, a narrow concrete mindedness. The condition is widespread and the public consciousness tremendously diversified, fragmented, and all that fragmentation leads to illusion. But this state of affairs marks the summation of the period of separativeness and the end, before so many centuries, of this intense distinctiveness of thought. Say a higher version of Mercury will take over, and the divisions of Saturn no longer prevail. We remember that Saturn carries that sickle, and that can be produce many cleavages. It also mows down the forms. So the history, from the perspective of the hierarchy is really, really interesting. So, and he's rounding off the dates, because if you get too specific about dates, people with a too concrete approach will fall into error and illusion. So sometimes it's truer to generalize than it is to become overly specific. After noting and watching this trend of affairs for another 100 years, that's how they are, They watch what we do, and there's been a lot of watching now, seeing how the consciousness movement went and what it succeeded or did not succeed in doing. Looking at the international scene, looking at fifth ray weaponry and the possibility of humanity's self-destruction. There are many things, looking at environmental depredations by careless people who don't plan to live another life and don't give a damn, for what might happen to others. So all that's going on. Then came the conclave of all departments around about, probably 1525, but around about the year 1500 AD. Their objective was to determine how the urge to integration, which is essentially the keynote of our universal order, could be hastened, and what steps could be taken to produce that synthesis and unification of the world in the world of thought, which would make possible the manifestation of the purpose of the divine life, which had brought all into being. Now, behind all this is the development of the various expressions of the Renaissance, maybe even from 1425 in some countries, but certainly in the later 1400s and in the 1500s, Renaissance is developing. And where did the energy come from to do that? Did it just come out of nowhere? So it sounds very much like the Brotherhood is behind the possibility of the Renaissance, just as a new Renaissance is coming, and one with very unbelievable, glorious potentials, probably something to do with the incoming of the fourth ray in 2025 from its monadic aspect. And by that, do we mean people whose subray, whose monadic subray is the fourth ray? And I'm not talking about souls here, I'm talking about the monadic plane. Whatever it is, that ray is coming in, and a great Renaissance is coming. And we hardly might believe that when we look around at all of the suffering and the low state in which many human beings find themselves. But I think, a lot of karma is being paid and the coast is being cleared. When the world of thought is unified, then the outer world will fall into synthetic order. So they were trying to their object. What was their object? To produce integration, which is the keynote of our universal order, how it could be hastened, and what steps taken to produce the synthesis and unification in world thought, which would, eventually make divine purpose appear, make it manifest. Okay, that was their objective. And when the world of thought is unified, then the outer world will fall into a synthetic order. It's chaotic thinking that is our problem, but remember what the hierarchy is called, the society of organized and illumined minds. It should be remembered here that the masters think in large terms and work in wider cycles of evolutionary endeavor. The saying is said that they stride centuries. Their steps are a century long. The tiny and temporary cycles, the small ebb and flow of the cosmic processes do not engage their attention in the first instances. So big cycles engage the interest and attention of the masters. So at this conclave of the year 1500, now I'm thinking immediately ahead that in the year 1600 there was a counter-reformation. Just think the Reformation came in the 1500s, and a lot of the abuses of the Catholic Church were noted and attacked and gone beyond, transcended with Martin Luther's work, but then came the Counter-Reformation. So, there's always that return impulse. If you're moved too much off your center, you recoil upon the reforming force. But anyway, at this conclave, they had three things to do: to view the divine plan on as large a scale as possible and refresh their minds with the vision. And, isn't it interesting that even the hierarchy has to refresh the mind? So this centennial conclave must be a high point of inspiration for them. Just imagine Wesak of the year 2025. Be nice to be in physical form for that one, but maybe, who knows, even more intense on the inner planes. Probably the Wesak time is the high point of illumination, of enlightenment. The forces of enlightenment are liberated. And in these centennial conclaves, I think the Wesak festival and the possibility of a closer approach to Shambhala provide a very intense point of inspiration. So how could they think of the divine plan largely, as possible? So this you might say, in line with the intended development proposed by the solar logos, considering, of course, our planet as a chakra, an important one, base of the spine center of the solar logos. What else did they have to do? History is so interesting, especially a history about which we could really know very little, nothing really. Where are things of this nature taught, except in the inner occult circles and through the care to share of such a messenger as Master Decay? To note what influences or energies were available to use in the large endeavor to which they were pledged. So this is a planetary, systemic, and cosmic assessment, because they've got to weave They've got to warp, they've got to woof, they've got to loom, they've got to weave into manifestation various energies or make possible humanity's assistance through human hands and human feet, as it is said in the Agni Yoga teaching. So what can you use? What are your materials? Well, let's just say ray cycles are here important, and great astrological cycles is TRL cycles, which, there's the entry of the third decan of Pisces, which is really, well, for the masters, it is the third decan. For others, it may be the first decan, but anyway, it's the third phase of that energy. It's very Martian. In the third decan of Pisces, Mars rules, hence such cruelties wrought out in the last 600 years or 700 years or 700 years. That number 720 is important if you take 2160, related to 412. All these numbers match up well, and we do have a final decan before we're entering the third decan of Aquarius. But from another perspective, the perspective of the hierarchy, we are going through things more in order: Aquarius, Gemini, and then Libra, rather than entering Libra, Gemini, and then Aquarius. And in those days, one was ending, the average person was ending there with the decan, which was the Pisces decan. But from another perspective, we begin with Pisces for the advanced being and go to Cancer and then into a Scorpio decanate. And really, when you look at the Scorpio decanate and the incredible cruelties which have been perpetrated during these years, you see the influence of Scorpio and of Mars. It's almost like a battle is going on within our planetary range that would put Mars in its place. Mars has risen up. The non-sacred planet has had tremendous influence on human society and international relations. And that Mars influence has got to be subdued. Otherwise, we would be in a situation where a non-sacred planet was taking over the direction of earthly progress. And Earth is already a sacred planet interiorly, so Earth is more advanced at this time, which is interesting, which means that in our planetary logos, the base of the spine center is somehow more advanced than the solar plexus center. Or, well, from that point of view, we might look at Mars as the sacral center. As I said before, it's possible that several planets are involved in each of the chakra demonstrations of our solar logos. So to note what influences or energies were available to use, because you have to have materials, you're creating. And you've got to use them, and hierarchy had to use them in a timely manner. Note that in 1575, the great second ray would be coming in. And in 1575, coming in of the great second ray. Now that would be something that hierarchy, which is a representative of the second ray of love wisdom, would absolutely have to know and utilize, because We are trying to drive the entire planetary manifestation towards the expression of the planetary soul on the second ray. The next thing would be to train men and women who were then probationers, chelas, and initiates, so that in due time they could have a satisfactory band of assistants on whom they could in the future centuries rely. So training begins centuries before reliance upon those who are being trained. And who knows, maybe some of us were alive at that time and underwent the beginning of certain kind of training, either in the East or in the West. Whoop, where am I? Okay. So they had in connection with these aspirants two problems. You know, it's really sounding like this conclave of the early 1500s was a really important one. He's saying a lot more about it than he did about the conclave in the year 1400, isn't he? 1400. So there's some kind of decrystallization and breaking of orthodoxy and breaking of the medieval attitude and church crystallization, political crystallization existing everywhere, and all that had to be broken up. And I suppose the answer to the breaking up was the introduction of those streams of energy which would manifest as the Renaissance. In Italy, certainly during the 1400s, the Renaissance was visible. Now, maybe it went to other countries later in the 1500s. So overcoming separativeness and crystallization and the need to create integration and synthesis in, well, that's more in the 1500s, I guess. So breaking the separativeness. Okay, so okay, so really in the 1400 conclave, breaking down of separativeness and crystallization. That's what had to be done. Now we're having quite a discussion here about what's being done as a result of the meeting of the 1500s. Of course, these masters, they've achieved a kind of immortality. They use the Maya Varupa. They can come and go as they will. Physical mortality is not an issue for them, and they have, what do they have? Let's just call it, have an idea here that the masters have continuity of conclave, I'll put it in caps, continuity of conclave consciousness. And I'll try to spell things correctly too. So here are the problems facing the group that assembled in the 1500s. They had to deal with the failure on the part of even the most advanced disciples to preserve continuity of consciousness, a failure even now manifested by even initiates. See, for instance, FCD, who needed to be reminded of an interview in his master's ashram. Sorry, Master KH. Even initiates. So we need to have that kind of memory where we can preserve memory from one state to another. Otherwise, we have discontinuous episodic consciousness, and we cannot make an integration of it. And we cannot see implications and have understanding the way we otherwise would if we could hold all these things in mind. So basically, the inner and outer worlds were not related. Let's just say that what consciousness, let's just say that what one was doing in the inner worlds was not brought through into the outer world. And this retarded realization. Okay, what else? The masters found that the minds, what an investigation it must be, this kind of research is probably even now gearing up when one is considering what has been the progress since 1925. Alice Bailey's school was just coming into fruition with her cooperators in New York. And here it is, 2018. We're only a few years away from that centennial. What has been really accomplished, and in an occult manner, which appears to the occult investigation of the higher beings. They see as we cannot see. We might look at the external history and say, well, look what's happened in transportation, look what's happened in aviation, look what's happened in communication. There's been a lot along that line. What's happened in terms of the emergence of nations, what's happened in terms of war and international cooperation or international friction. Those things we can see, but the deeper causes are available to the insight, scientific, higher psychic insight of the masters. The masters found the minds and brains of chelas curiously insensitive to the higher contacts. In other words, why would they be? Maybe they should have been more so. And this, again, is a condition which still prevails. Now, DK said of his students, I always like to capitalize the pronouns, he said basically, your alignment is weak. And so he gave them in the book, Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, or at least the lesson sets that became that book. He said, okay, here is the third meditation. It's all about the acme of alignment. So he gave a remedy, but it's still the case. Somehow we've been so conditioned by the concretizing fifth ray, which repels higher impression, that we just go on in this insensitive state. Now, oftentimes, regretfully, maybe, it is suffering and the wear and tear and the rending in the fourth ray, which will sensitize the individual to higher impression. But for a long time, they discovered this in let's say 1500, 1525, whatever. And here we are 500 years later, and it still prevails. Or 400 years later, when he was writing this, and it still prevails. The chelas then is now possessed aspiration, a desire to serve humanity, devotion, and occasionally fair mental equipment. But that telepathic sensitivity, which DK did work on cultivating in his groups, that instinctive response to hierarchical vibration, and that freedom from the lower psychism, which so many, glorify and want to hang on to, which are the needed prerequisites to intensive intelligent work, were singularly lacking. For that matter, they are still distressingly so. So he's giving us a real, a real assessment here of what's lacking. Let's go over it. The chelas then as now possessed aspiration, I guess we all do. A desire to serve humanity, again, we have it. Devotion, I think we have it. And a fair mental equipment, well, with the emphasis, it's not too good, it's not too bad, it's fair mental equipment, but that telepathic sensitivity, the higher telepathy to the divine plan, that instinctive response to what's coming from the plane whereon the hierarchy is focused, and that's now largely in the cosmic ethers. That freedom from the lower psychism, which covers over the truth and distorts it, which are the needed prerequisites to intensive intelligent work, were singularly lacking. Of course, the fifth ray would be growing in power during the coming centuries. For that matter, they are still distressingly so. So this is a clear evaluation of where disciples stand in terms of their sensitivity to higher impression. Telepathic sensitivity is decidedly on the increase as a result of world conditions and the evolutionary trend, and this is for the workers on the inner planes a most encouraging sign, but love of psychic phenomena and the failure to differentiate between the vibrations of the various grades of hierarchical workers still greatly hinders the work. Well, what do we have there on that higher plane? We have plane number one. Is it spiritual telepathy? How is it called? Makes me want to go here to surely. Hey, it'd be diagrams. There it is. Huh? So let's just see if we can find this. Open and go backwards. Yeah, that's that compendium by Keith Bailey, and yeah, it's called spiritual. It's called telepathy, just spiritual telepathy. There it is, and that would allow you to receive the energies of the higher mind in the earlier days and of the spiritual triad more recently, and it's distressingly undeveloped from their perspective. You might ask here, and rightly so, what is the plan? And trying to divine what is the divine plan is not easy to do. We do know it has to do with the coming of spiritual light, spiritual love, and spiritual will sacrificially applied. We know those big generalities, but there are specifics involving cycles and higher form of knowledge and so forth. So when I speak of the plan, I do not mean such a general one as the plan of evolution or the plan for humanity, which we call by the somewhat unmeaning term of soul unfoldment. Okay, so something more specific is meant. And the custodians of the plan know it and receive it from the registrants of the purpose. Now, this is described in the rays and the initiations. These two aspects of the scheme for our planet are taken for granted. So evolution and unfoldment are taken for granted. The plan, as at present sensed, of course, we're told, that it's written on this rare material that only the masters know about, and it's a series of symbols indicating the types of unfoldment and capacity that have to be developed by certain times. So the plan is set down, but interpreting it, applying the right energy or force at the right time, all of this is in the hands of those who are responsible for manifesting the divine plan. Okay, so the plan as at present sense and for which the masters are steadily working might be defined as follows. It is the production of a subjective synthesis in humanity and of a telepathic interplay which will eventually annihilate time. It will make possible available to every man all past achievements and knowledges, and will reveal to man the true significance of the mind and brain and make him the master of that equipment, and will make him therefore omnipresent and eventually open the door to omniscience. Okay, this is a technical description of the plan as the masters conceive it and as has descended to them from Shambhala. A subjective synthesis in humanity, so all these illusory and glamorous barriers have to go, and of a telepathic interplay which will be instantaneous. What Master Mori calls it is the lightning of thought, so it will annihilate the time to get from here to there. All these, all these are third ray developments, not third ray monad developments. It's the very first step. Omnipresence is third ray, omniscience second ray, omnipotence first ray. It will make available to every man all past achievements and knowledges. Every man. You almost think about that kind of chip being implanted that knows it all, contains it all. That I think more subjective methods will be found. And you kind of wonder, do the masters have this right now? For the masters, are all past achievements and knowledges available? It will reveal to man the true significance of his mind and brain and make him the master of that equipment, which he is hardly yet, and will make him therefore omnipresent and eventually open the door to omniscience. This next development of the plan will produce in man an understanding, intelligent and cooperative, of the divine purpose for which the one in whom we live and move and have our being has deemed it wise to submit to incarnation. And this is the reason for the incarnation in this solar system of our planetary logos. So, we want to get an idea. We have to register purpose, even as we have created this synthesis which annihilates time. So, from a synthesis which annihilates time to a registration of the divine purpose of our planetary logos, and of the plan which he uses to manifest that purpose. Think not that I can tell of the plan as it truly is. It is not possible for any man below the grade of initiate of the third degree to glimpse it, and far less understand it. I mean, if even the masters have only, the first syllable of the name of Sanat Kumara, they know that, but not his full name, and the name embodies the purpose. How could we, knowing so much less, understand these things? Just a glimpse. That's all we might get, but it might be quite inspiring. Help us and be inspired and inspire others. The development of the mechanism whereby a disciple may be en rapport with those responsible for the working out of the plans, and the capacity to know, and not just dimly sense, that tiny aspect of the whole which is the immediate step ahead, and with which cooperation is possible, that can be achieved by all disciples and should be held as the goal, therefore, of all aspirants. Our tiny part in the divine plan can be sensed, and we can cooperate with it, and only with it, not with the wholeness of the plan. So we have to develop a way of registering this, and the more our meditation is perfected and our antakarana is built, the more the reason for this monadic extension, which we seem to be, the reason for its existence will be shown to us, and we will not bark up the wrong tree and take the wrong path and go on errant journeys, but will follow the correct path in the right way towards the right objective. With the exception of probationary disciples who are not yet sufficiently stable in their endeavor, and stability is a big part. Mental focus brings stability. I think I can say that. Mental focus brings stability. All can therefore strive towards achieving continuity of consciousness. So, between the registrations of the various vehicles, and at awakening that inner light which, when seen and intelligently used, will serve to reveal other aspects of the plan, and especially that one to which the illumined knower can respond and usefully serve. So, meditate and awaken the inner light, as that inner light will reveal those aspects of the divine plan with which the meditator can cooperate, and with which he is intended to cooperate. It's always good to find yourself in the stream of correct purpose. How do you know? Well, there's some kind of resonance about it, When you're in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time, there's a lock, there's a fitness, there's a locking in, like two pieces of machinery that just click together and they fit. And you also know when dealing with taking apart or putting together mechanisms, trying not to break them, there's that moment when fitness comes. I sometimes, this is homely, but let's say you have a bottle of Listerine mouthwash, which is so tightly sealed. Well, you could easily break it, break the plastic, but there's that moment of right pressure, right turn when everything just opens up and you've got it correct. So that's the case, low analogy, but when finding your place in the divine plan. And so many of us are on the way to do that, but we haven't really done it yet. So to bring this about has been the objective of all training during the past 400 years. Now that would be, from 1500 to 1900, or 1525 to 1925, which would be the time at which the Treatise on White Magic was being written, right after Cosmic Fire was published in 1925. You begin to realize what a task Alice Bailey had, how many, didn't have a computer really, no. She had to be a good typist, and she typed single-spaced, and she said how many pages she had to type for the Tibetan every time they worked. Was it 7 pages approximately of single-spaced type what work it was. And, you had to be really sure that you were putting down the right words. The responsibility was so great. I wonder, can we really understand the kind of burden that was on her? I mean, I'm quite convinced she was a third-degree initiate at a certain point, and maybe could carry that burden. But there's few of us, as Master Moria says, there's camels and there's donkeys, and don't put the load of a camel on a donkey, otherwise you're going to witness the great collapse. So anyway, 400 years, and from this fact you can vision the utter patience of the knowers of the race. They know that time is essentially an illusion, and that we never run out of time, never have, and never will. They work slowly and with deliberation, free from any sense of speed, even though we're told at this time that organizing for speed is important, but we're also told to make haste slowly and carefully. So free from any sense of speed towards their objective, but, and herein lies the immediate interest of what I have to communicate, they do have a time limit. So that puts the pressure on, doesn't it? And what we want to say here is there is the time space schedule of the planetary logos, for the fulfillment of which, excuse me, group initiation is required. So this is all based upon the law of cycles. You have to know what energy is available and for how long they're available, and when they are in their positive phase and when they're in their more crystallizing negative phase. You have to know so many things that are comprised in that state we find at the top of this compendium called all knowledge. On the third subplane of the atmic plane, it's got to be a plane which is very involved with intelligence. And do remember that Master R, when he was Francis Bacon, told his uncle, was it Lord Burleigh, that he took all knowledge as his province. What is my kingdom? All knowledge. And a province, well, province is a lesser kingdom. So maybe, in his mind was the idea of all planetary knowledge, and then he could compare it as a province to solar systemic or universal knowledge and so forth. They do have a time limit, and this is based on the law of cycles. You can't be forcing Aquarian issues prematurely. You can't be sustaining them when their time has passed. Many people now are trying to sustain Piscean issues, and their time is rapidly passing, and they're investing everything they have in the sustainment of the old Piscean ways as if no evolution could occur, and they're locked into the concrete mind in such a way that they cannot be convinced that under laws of cycles a new energy is appearing. It concerns the operation of certain periods of opportunity which necessarily have their term. During these times of opportunity, forces, influences, and energies are temporarily at work, and of these the masters must make use. So they have to live at a high point of tension in order to do so. It's not easy to be a master of the wisdom. It's just, what is that statement at the end of that marvelous poem, that the road winds upward all the way? Is that it? And when do we reach the top? Well, there are various tops, various peaks, but the peak of the universe is eventually the goal of every emanatory extension into lesser self-knowledge. And then as we retract along the emanative stream, the self-knowledge, which is ours at the very top of the universe, becomes increasingly ours and unveiled, and our ring pass knot expands until it becomes the universal ring pass knot. Okay, it's going to take a long time. If it takes the solar system 311 trillion 40 billion years to express both its subjective and objective nature, then how long will it take for the greater structures to fulfill their responsibility? Lesser structures always fulfill their responsibility first. Now, I would like to say that this is the end of 2 hours, but I know I'm completely off. And due to my loss of the chronometer, I don't even want to touch it, don't want to look at it in the wrong way. Sometimes I and my chronometer, here's this little chronometer, have an ongoing battle, and usually it wins. So, going on. Looking ahead, during the conclave to which I have made reference, the assembled servers of the race noted the future coming in of the Aquarian Age. Now, Francis Bacon was born in the late 1500s. And supposedly died in 1616, but did he die and all that? There's always these mysterious deaths around the masters. You don't know if it's a real death or a fake death, just to disappear from the world of human thought for a while and be unhampered by that which is directed toward you when you're deemed to be alive and present. So they saw ahead the Aquarian Age, and it would already, the overlap period would begin in the late 1500s with him as a kind of avatar for the coming Aquarian Age, and he had such a horoscope representing Aquarius. I think the Sun, the Ascendant, Mercury, all clustered there together in Aquarius. Can't remember the Moon, maybe Aries, I'm not sure. But anyway, they noted and they sought to prepare man for that period which would approximate 2,500 years, with overlaps, even though maybe a more accurate reading according to the Brahmanical chronology is 2160, and which could, if duly utilized, bring about the unification consciously and intelligently of mankind, which is something that had really never been achieved before, and so produce the manifestation of what I prefer to call scientific brotherhood, using the fifth ray to prove the oneness of humanity and the true monadic brotherhood of humanity, in contradistinction to the sentimental connotation of the term, which is now so present. In other words, we would have to know why brotherhood is a fact in nature, and it takes the fifth ray to know this. And when Bacon came in, he really called for the application of the fifth ray. He said to the scholastics, look, you've been thinking for a long time about reality, and you've been weaving many thought forms, and many of them probably are false, they're unproven, so use the fifth ray and prove what it is that you say. And maybe begin with the natural world, because probably you can handle that and cannot yet prove the other kinds of assertions that relate to the higher worlds. So let's just say at this conclave, in 1500 or 1525, the Aquarian age, age of Aquarius was anticipated, and preparations for the coming of a scientific brotherhood began. By the time we reach the last decanate in the Aquarian age under Venus, and having profited by what went on in the Mercurian decanate, we will have that period for many of the realization of scientific brotherhood. Right now, we're riven by all kinds of separative feelings and separative attitudes and separative actions, and people are so deeply immersed in the three-headed dog, you might say, of illusion, glamour, and Maya, that they cannot free themselves. The limitations of human consciousness are very severe, and we who maybe know a little more about it, just a little more, have the responsibility of pointing people in the right direction so that their consciousness can widen and their estimation of what they are will change, and their estimation of how one gets along with one's fellow human beings will also change. It appeared to them, the masters, that at that time that it would be necessary to do two things before the coming potencies of the Aquarian age could be profitably employed. You see, they really see ahead by centuries, don't they? They have that long range vision because, in a way they are disengaged from the limitations of the human brain, and they are in the higher aspects of the mind where many other things that are limited by the brain can in fact be seen. First of all, humanity must have its consciousness elevated to the mental plane. It must be expanded so that it included not only the world of emotions and of feeling, but also of intellect. Emotional man, no problem. We have emotional man, but we have a certain obtuseness with regard to the human mind. So how shall that happen? How shall that happen? As they look ahead and say, this is what you need. After all, we're entering very much a fifth ray age. It always accompanies Aquarius, along with a big seventh ray cycle, which does not always accompany Aquarius, except through Uranus and the planetary rulership. But there's a ray cycle which accompanies the equinoctial ages, precessional ages, and the rays keep changing. So you can have Aquarius 1, Aquarius 2, Aquarius 3, Aquarius 4, 5, 6, 7. Right now, there's been did he say, a sequence there of the sixth ray followed by the seventh? Anyway, these ray cycles endure approximately 2,500 years. They have to, because that's about as long as precessional age endures, and so whatever the normal duration of a ray cycle, it has to be there for as long as the zodiacal sign is in effect during a precessional age. Now, some have questioned, look, we've got a 25,000 year grand Platonic year of Aquarian influence. Will there be a 25,000 year seventh ray presence? And I don't think DK says there will be, but then again, he doesn't say there won't be. So, on that larger sense, will we have the seventh ray along with the greater Aquarius for a very long time? That has yet to be determined. So first of all, let's get humanity's consciousness up onto the mental plane. And, the medieval time was a great age of belief. And I'm remembering some mystical book I used to read. It was by a certain Jan van Ruysbroek, probably a Dutchman. It was called The Cloud of Unknowing. It's not a very fifth ray title except for the idea of the cloud, the cloud upon the mountaintop associated with the fifth ray. So it was ignoring a lot of the more material world. But that concrete mind had to be developed, and Sir Francis Bacon was really instrumental in guiding Western mentality towards that cultivation. The minds of men must be made widely and generally active, and the entire level of human intelligence must be raised. Okay, so that was the first necessity noticed, the first necessity. So, oh, come on now. Oh, not again. Okay. So, this was the first necessity that the masters noticed. Then, it was necessary, secondly, that something should be done to break down the barriers of separateness, of isolation, and of prejudice which were keeping men apart from each other, and which they foresaw would increasingly do so because, the fifth ray rules the law of cleavage, and the fifth ray would be coming in, and the concrete mind would be cultivated. So cycle by cycle, men were becoming more and more wrapped up in their own selves, satisfaction and inclusiveness, and racial pride. And boy, look how that worked out in relation to the Teutonic subrace of the fifth root race in these world wars based largely on racial superiority. The result of this would lead inevitably to wide cleavages and the erection of world barriers between nation and nation and between race and race. So they noticed this. The menace, we might say, they noticed this. Now, it's a bit hard, see, you cultivate the mind, but then you want to get rid of separation. The two kind of go together. So the menace of separatism. Fifth ray rules the law of cleavages. And if you cultivate the lower mind, then you must use the fifth ray and yet avoid the cleavages. So not easy, and maybe the arts would come in here and beauty to help bring people together. It certainly was attempted. We're told that there was a great attempt in the 19th century to bring in ahead of their time certain artists and musicians who would try to overcome the kind of materialism that was being generated by Bismarck and a very separative, fifth ray minded Germany. And they certainly saw themselves as very separate. But the First World War broke down a lot of that, and DK said we needed it. The loss of the body, death, horrific deaths, all that, I guess we've been through it. But finally we realized that life out on the physical plane is a dream, and our inner integrity as a psychological being is never disrupted. We remain, and we look on at the dissolution of our outer form and realize that the inner human being remains. So this is quite a task, isn't it, to cultivate the mind and yet avoid separativeness. So, say, how then do you cultivate the mind and yet avoid separativeness? That's a word used in our teaching here, but usually separateness is the way. Separativeness. Okay. Now, this determination of the members of the hierarchy to train the minds of men more rapidly and to build towards a more synthetic unity brought them to the decision which involved the formation of group units. I suppose involving, to a degree, the second ray, which is affiliative, and brought about the emergence of those groups of workers and thinkers who, through their activities, have so largely governed and molded our worlds for the past 3 or 4 centuries. The emergence of groups to help cultivate the mind and overcome separativeness. So, the group idea has been growing and growing, and now in the Aquarian age, it's really going to flourish, and we're on the way there to that. And I think, by the time we reach the era of brotherly love at the final decan of Aquarius, we're going to have the group idea will be very firmly established, at least in the upper echelons of humanity. Now, it's not like everybody's going to achieve everything possible. In the Aquarian age, there are still moonchain types who are not going to achieve the path until the next round, according to Cosmic Fire anyway. We have therefore, dating from this conclave, the inauguration of definite and specific group work along clearly defined lines, with each group standing for some peculiar presentation of truth and for some aspect or knowledge of reality. So the group idea fostered by the impending coming in of the second ray took hold. Okay, okay, that's not a valid number. Okay, good. So the coming in of the second ray fostered these group developments. Well, there's the law of economy, there's time to be considered. There's the unfoldment of consciousness to be considered. There's acquiescence to the divine will to be considered, all along the first 3 ray lines. It's like a big game. How do you make all that happen? How do you orchestrate this so that humanity, who by and large has no idea of what they're really passing through in terms of the larger possibilities and values, makes the grade? How do you do that? It's getting the impression that it's a very tough role to hold, to be a member of the spiritual hierarchy, sustaining that point of tension. That's really the load of the super camel, and we are like very little donkeys here. So now, you can almost see this looks like the beginning of what later would become the seed group project. These groups fall generally into 4 major divisions: cultural, political, religious, and scientific. And, we're coming in there with the banner of peace, an ancient banner, which was adopted by the Agni Yoga group. So there's the creation of groups that are responsible. They're not necessarily just ray groups, are they? Cultural work can occur along 3rd and 4th ray lines, political around 1, 6, and 7, religious around 2 and 6, and scientific through ray 5 and ray 7, and maybe some of ray 3. So they are wider than strictly ray groupings. So they fall into 4 major divisions. In more modern times, 3 other groups have definitely emerged, and they are the philosophical, certainly ray 3 and ray 2, psychological, ray 4 and ray 2, and some of ray 5. The highest method of teaching for ray 5 is the esoteric psychology, and the financial groups, particularly ray 3 and ray 7. So, now we're starting to cover all the bases, but still it's a mixture. It's not just there. No. as usual. There is not simply one ray per group. It is a mixture. And also a mixture of chakras. So, if we say, the political workers, well, all of them, in terms of the C groups, have the head center. But then the other centers are interesting. Psychologists have the throat center and heart center and solar plexus. So in a way, ray 3, ray 2, ray 6, plus ray 1. Political workers have head center, heart center, base of the spine. So head center is always ray 1 in a way, or very synthetically including them all. Heart is ray 2 and has some 1 in it because the life principle is there, and the base of the spine, ray 1. And thus we can see by studying the chakras of the modern seed groups which rays would be involved in supporting them. The seventh group is a group of scientific workers. The fact that it's the seventh group tells us about its seventh ray. And it has, what does it have? The head center. I think it has the sacral center, base of the spine. And does it have the throat center? Well, there's one way to find out, Go here to Discipleship in the New Age and go to number 1 and go to page 40, roughly. And maybe we will find out for that scientific group which it is. And here, maybe it's 41. Yeah, it might be 41. It does tell us at a certain point which chakras are involved here. Yeah, there it are. Head, throat, and sacral centers. Interesting. So there's the third ray and the third ray through the throat and the sacral, but also the seventh ray through the sacral center, as Uranus, the scientific planet. Higher science is always ruling. Third ray is involved, 3 and 7 is involved, and ray 1. And maybe like the economic workers, very similar, but the heart is there for the economic workers in group 9, but that's adding 1 center to the scientific workers. Maybe they're not working with so much of that heart energy, but they're working with the power to materialize in the sacral center, and the throat, the power to create and to understand, and of course always the guiding head center. Now, what else? Really, I'm all at sea. I haven't any idea how long this program is because of my loss of the chronometer. I have a funny little phone here which just is at war with me. Philosophers have, of course, always been with us, but they have been, for the most part, isolated units who have founded schools characterized by partisanship and separativeness. Okay, but what about the academies of Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle? They were broader, no? I would think. Now there are no outstanding figures as in the past. These were 3 of the great ones, and among the Neoplatonist philosophers, of whom maybe Decay was one. Proclus, Iamblichus, I'm always forgetting the very first one, the one who wrote the Aeneid. Plotinus, Plotinus Proclus Iamblichus, and maybe some of the estimations go, and you never know, you have to get these things with a grain of salt, that Plotinus, or Plotinus, however we want to pronounce it, was Master DK, famously running a school of philosophy. Now there are no outstanding figures as in the past, but groups who represent certain ideas, groups. So what do we want to say? That the group has taken the place of the individual, just as the new group of world servers in a totally DVPD developed state will take the place of the Buddha. And already there's a question about whether the Wesak festival really is going on anymore. I guess it doesn't hurt to continue to celebrate it, but the responsibility begins to fall now on the groups who can take over that kind of responsibility. I remember back in 1981, I was in the Arcane School, or Lucis Trust, and it did seem that Mary Bailey had thought that this was the time that the world servers were indeed going to take over the responsibility of the Buddha, because the DK had written in his Wesak message of 1946, so there you have 35 years, 46 to 81, that for a few more decades, the Buddha would fulfill his function, but then it was going to change, and then a group would begin to be responsible. Well, who knows? The plan is adaptable, and perhaps assessing the condition in which humanity found itself, well, unanticipated changes could be made. So I just have to say, I don't know. But anyway, that was her impression. And even now we're celebrating Wesak without really knowing whether the Buddha has made his annual appearance. But even so, re-emphasizing that rhythm, that resonance is of value. So it is of profound importance that the work of these 7 groups of thinkers be recognized as part of the hierarchical program, not just a human activity, designed to produce a certain situation to bring about certain preparatory conditions for the coming of the Christ and the externalization of the hierarchy, and is playing a definite part in the work of world evolution as far as humanity is concerned. So now let's get it straight here. What are these groups again? Okay, and what did he say? Cultural? No. Cultural. Okay, here it is. Cultural, political, religious, and scientific. And, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to get all these divisions and then eliminate the words in between. So, 7 groups of thinkers should be recognized, etc. So I'll put this here, and, well, okay, I'll just say the list of 7. Maybe I'll leave in that really little connecting sentence. Okay, the list of 7 groups: cultural, political, religious, scientific, philosophical, psychological, and financial. And now the C groups are a little more specific, but you can put the C groups in these categories as well, and find places where they appropriately belong. So it is of profound importance that the work of these 7 groups of thinkers be recognized as part of the historical hierarchical program designed to produce a certain situation to bring about certain preparatory conditions and as playing a definite part in the work of evolution as far as humanity is concerned. Let's say all these are hierarchically inspired. Of course, human interest is there, but they need the impulse from within. I mean, Einstein picked up the theory of relativity, but without the work of the sort of inner third ray, fifth ray, would he have done that? Could he have done that? So usually the great precipitations of the necessary ideas from the realm of intuition, and he was a great intuitive, come from the inner worlds first. And under the influence of the different rays as they cycled in and out of activity, little groups of men emerged, played their part in group formation, and disappeared, often unaware of their inherent synthesis and of their co-workers. So to say, the groups appeared and disappeared under the hierarchical cultivation of the group idea, which was deemed necessary in 1500 or 1525. As can be seen in any intelligent historical retrospect, the work that they did for the race and their contribution to the pageant of the process of mankind stands out with clarity. So this we find in the study of the history of ideas and the actions which resulted from the cultivation and embodiment of those ideas. I think some ray cycle work along this line has been done by Stephen Pugh, and I think he's taken quite a few centuries to trace ray cycles in terms of what emerged as a result of them. I have not the time to take this process of groups, each custodian of a special contribution, and trace for you the work they did or the subjective impulses under which they worked. So, human beings have taken this up and tried to trace this, and with some illuminating results. I can but indicate the trend of their endeavor and leave to some illumined student of history the delineation of the golden thread of their spiritual work as they raised the mental standard of the race and put man en rapport with the world in which he lived, opening his eyes not only to the nature of matter and of form, but also to the hidden depths of his own being. So the psychological groups are there too. And I think Stephen was working under the impulse of that suggestion here. And I think he did, some very useful work along this line. We have to, take the seeds of suggestion as they fall from the master's lips and begin to develop them in our own way. But, Master DK obviously is limited by time too, isn't he? And he's just sketching out the ABCs of many things, and he says, it would take a number of volumes or treatises to really deal with this subject. So, there's that expansive second ray associated with omniscience, and he knows it, but he has to be very economical in terms of what he gives in order to respect the time-space schedule and the relentless accuracy of the law of cycles. You can't stretch a cycle beyond its determined time. You can't begin a cycle before its determined time. Through their activities, we now have a humanity in close relation, though not at one, and a humanity characterized by three things. Okay, now I think I find the need to stop at this point. So stopping here and taking up in the next program the results of the group work stimulated by hierarchy from the time of the 1500, let's say 1525 conclave. Results are shown below. So, I think we went as far as, was it 397? Let's see, we're at 407 now. So, and as I say, I have no idea how this is working out in terms of how many, here it is. Yeah, we're 395, we've gone to 407, so that's sort of 12 pages. And let's see how we did. I think I could continue, but I think it would be better at this point if I did not. So this is the end of number 47, and it goes from 395 to 407. And we'll eliminate this earlier part, and basically it is Rule 10, but the 31st program on Rule 10 of all things, goodness. And this is the end of 47, and we're going to be beginning with 48. Pretty soon we'll match up with that first 50 programs that have been done, and we'll have 100 programs here so far, but I don't think until we reach about 150 or 160 will this particular commentary on this book be completed such as it is. I always have to say such as it is, sometimes when you buy a house, they say as is, don't complain about it later, as is. You buy it with many hidden liabilities. And we're going on then to the 32nd program, it looks like. Is that correct? Let's see. Well, the 30th program has been done. The 31st program is about to be completed. So I think we're pretty right here, and we'll go on. Maybe tonight. I don't know if I'm crazy enough to do that. But the hour's getting late, and there are other responsibilities. And so this is the 47th program finishing and 48th to begin. All right, friends. Well, there's so much to study, so much to meditate about, and so much to consolidate before the great offering continues in this threefold series of treatises that Master DK will offer. In what manner we don't know, but we know they will be very important. Yeah. And we have to do our best in preparing for the end of the 21st century when, according to HPV, as I've mentioned before, occultism must win the day. She has some strange way of referring to it, but it's the end of the 21st century, and, well, by that time we'll be really ready for the age of Aquarius and will have outlived to fullest measure the present cycle of the sixth ray and the present Piscean age, the precessional age. We will have outlived that, and we'll be ready then to embark upon Aquarianism unrestrained by the Piscean influence, and yet somehow supported by it because certain values will have been achieved, which are necessary. Okay. I guess that's it. And study hard and assimilate and apply and enjoy it while you're doing it. And we'll see you soon, and we'll go on about the developments of this group process, this group stimulation which occurred as a result of the conclave of 1525. Let's call it that. See you soon.